Hello, welcome back to Division I Rejects. I'm your host, Colvin. This is D1R 193 on the night of February 24th. Really exciting episode I've got for you here. I'm joined shortly by the commissioner of a conference that hasn't sponsored football in 51 seasons. That's Conference Carolinas. His name is Chris Colvin. I'm really excited to talk with him. Had a shot in the dark, kind of reached out to their people last week and wanted to make this happen. This is a really interesting development in Division II football. It's the 16th conference in D2 football, and there's a lot that goes into bringing football back to Conference Carolinas. We're going to talk all about that, the new playoff implications, especially with an automatic qualifier for their conference, even in their first season, due to some new NCAA legislation, a conference championship, scheduling agreements. So much good stuff there to talk about with Chris. Really appreciative of him spending some time with me tonight. So that's a big talk for D2 football tonight. We also, though, have in the D2 football scene a Hall of Fame Classic Week 0 matchup in D2 football between two really prominent HBCU programs that both had playoff victories this past season. So excited to talk about the early implications of that one, and we'll take kind of a deep dive into a look at both those teams later on and check out what they have coming into 2025 in that season. And finally, former D3 player, as of today, signed to an NFL team, someone that you probably know if you follow D3 football, but we'll talk about a new signing to a new squad for this individual. Plays defensive back, if there's a little bit of a spoiler for you there. But excited to talk about all of that. As always, though, if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, please, first and foremost. But otherwise, video chapters, that little red bar bottom of the screen, fast forward to any part of the video you think sounds interesting. Also listed in the description on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. And as always, follow us on the socials, reach out, let us know who we should have on the show next. Got a couple of really good guests lined up for you guys. But without further ado, let's get right into that conversation with Chris Colvin. Joining the show tonight, he's the man at the helm of the Division II conference that is sponsoring football for the first time in 51 years. It's Conference Carolinas Commissioner Chris Colvin. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I know we had mentioned it in passing on the show, but where better to hear it from the man himself? And I think the best first question to ask is why now? Why is this the right time going into 2025 for you to reintroduce this sport to your conference?
Yeah, I think the best way to answer that question is I was hired in 2019, and all the way back in 2019, it was a strategic goal of Conference Carolinas to get to the point where we could sponsor football within the conference. Back at that point, we had two institutions in the league that were playing football, both as associate members in other conferences, and we had two institutions that had already announced plans to start football. So we had four institutions engaged in football out of 11 at the time. And knowing that we had four institutions sponsoring football, but they weren't competing within the conference, it was definitely a strategic goal of the conference all the way back to 2019 that we do this. And so now flash forward 6 years and we're able to actually see the fulfillment of that over the last few years, and we're excited to start. So since that time, the original two institutions, North Greenville and Chowan, were playing football, and Barton and Erskine were the two that had just announced at the time that they were going to be starting. So we've had four institutions playing football really since 2020, and then with the addition of UNC Pembroke back in 2021, that got us to five institutions. And then Shorter University, who came into the conference as a full member, is competing this year as our sixth. And then, of course, we'll have Ferrum College coming on board next year to make number 7. So really, once we got to 6, the board of directors of the conference were really united that we wanted football to be one of the sports that we sponsor. And so essentially the timing was just, this was the year we could get it all, everybody pulled together. There's always a little bit of a lag in football scheduling and timing. So, it's been over 2 years now that we announced Shorter coming into the conference, and we announced that we were starting football. So we're excited to actually be 6 months away from actually making that a reality.
Say making that announcement so far in advance has got to be a daunting one, but it puts it right on the map, right? And now the countdown starts until this thing actually has to happen. And so, the wheels are definitely turning over there. Now, obviously, most of those schools that you had mentioned that had football teams prior competing in other conferences, SAC, MEC, Gulf South as those kind of affiliate members. What had the interest been like from the individual member institutions been like as far as turning this into a sponsored sport at the conference level? And when those conversations really started to gain some momentum, was there any any pushback from any of those schools? Have they found maybe a little bit more comfortable in some of those other conferences when it came to football specifically?
I would say every one of those institutions was very appreciative of the opportunity that they were given
Yeah.
to compete as associate members when they weren't full members of those conferences. So very, very appreciative. With that being said, I think to an institution, I mean, these are institutions that are full members of Conference Carolinas.
Yep.
That's their home conference. And so if there's an opportunity to compete in the sport of football against the same institutions that you are competing with in every other sport and that you're a full member of, that was always the priority for all those institutions. I think similarly resourced, similar missions, similar alignments
Yeah.
is just easier to achieve when you're competing in your home conference. And that was really the mindset of those original four institutions. And then we were able to bring in UNC Pembroke again, very appreciative of the Mountain East partnership with them because we were able to bring UNC Pembroke into the conference even before we had a solution for football because they still had a solution with the Mountain East.
Okay.
And they knew as soon as that happened that it was just a matter of time before they would also compete with their home conference.
And then given that you talked about some of those teams, really all of them you mentioned, down the list that are going to make up the field in 2025 for you guys. And, there's still some spots to be had. And there's some other conferences out there that are so large, they've gotten to the point where they have no out of conference games, right? There's a few of them that just play everyone in your conference. That's the season and you make the playoffs. Fantastic. For you guys, the challenge for a lot of people and a lot of schools at Division II level is how the hell do we fill the rest of those weeks? And so I think the big news for you guys recently is partnering with the Gulf South, and where you have two conferences that can come together in what would appear from an outside perspective to be a very mutually beneficial type of arrangement. That seems to be really big news. Talk about what goes into making a conference-wide scheduling agreement like that, and what exactly it entails for you guys in the near future.
Yeah, I think it boils down to mutual need, and we were in a situation. They're in a situation where their numbers dictate that they have a number of non-conference games to find. Our situation is similar. We actually had a pretty creative solution when we had six institutions that actually we were going to play a couple of teams twice. That was certainly never going to be the preferred solution, but
Yeah.
it was going to be one of the methods that we could use to get a schedule done. But as soon as we added Ferrum, which was great because it got us to seven institutions, but it also took away the dynamic of doing playing anybody twice because now we're in a 6-team round robin. And so being able to partner with the Gulf South to fill some of those games was definitely very beneficial. But I would say from the beginning when we made the announcement, early 2023 that we were starting football and having these discussions in depth was in December of 2022.
Okay.
The biggest fear and the biggest hurdle and the biggest challenge was not they all wanted to compete with each other in the conference schedule. The challenge was how are we going to fill an 11-game non-conference schedule? So, not only do we have the partnership with the Gulf South, but we've created what we think is a pretty creative Week 11 opportunity in the conference. So we're going to have a conference championship game.
Okay.
Week 11 is going to feature the two teams through the first 10 weeks of the season that finish first and second in the single round robin of the conference schedule. So that'll be a championship game. It will be the second time those teams have played, and that will determine our AQ. That will be our championship. But the other
Awesome.
5 teams in the conference are also going to play that week in Week 11. We have a partnership with the SIAC where 2 of our institutions are going to play 2 of their institutions. And they're in a similar boat where they've got 2 teams in a championship game. So in theory, it's going to be our third and fourth place teams against their third and fourth place teams.
That's awesome.
We do have some geographic restraints in there. So it doesn't have to be 3 against 3, 4 against 4. If our 5th place team is 50 miles away from their institution and our 4th place team is 600 miles away, then we're going to make that flip. So we're going to make some logical changes there, but we're excited about that partnership. And then the other 3 teams in the conference, we've got situations where they're all going to play games as well. 2 are going to play each other, and then we're going to have 1 institution that actually has a non-conference contract that we have a clause in that the conference is going to replace that institution if that institution qualifies for the conference championship. So we have everybody playing a game in Week 11 here in 2025 with 2 of them in the championship. Add that to the 6-game round robin. Add that to the Gulf South partnership, And then that really left most of our institutions having to find between 1 and 3 non-conference games. And I'm excited to say they've all done that. So we
Okay.
have 7 institutions with a full schedule for 2025, which in December of 2022, I'm not sure I would have predicted that
Yeah.
that would actually have happened.
That is no small feat. Hell yeah, that is awesome. And to hear the intricacies of what goes into some of those decisions is really neat, because the conference championship, that's something that obviously you've seen replicated at a couple other conferences at the D2 level. But to be able to go then and take some of the other top caliber teams from your conference and face them off against what should be other great competition from the SIAC, that's neat in the way that, yes, you're getting that competition, but you're also fostering these great games for the sport of D2 football, and while filling, of course, the requirement of getting in that last game, so to speak. So that's really neat. And then, like you said, the flexibility, the clause is a great example of that, where a team maybe over or underperforms, where they think they're going to happen. You got a substitute here or there, and you're going to make it happen, make these things happen for these teams, which is really cool. But back to the Gulf South, I think a little bit in general, 18 cross-conference games over the next 2 seasons. That, to me, is security for coaches and staffs in the offseason that otherwise might be scrambling to do what I'm sure you guys have been doing for the last probably calendar year and scheduling some of these out-of-conference games. How involved is the conference in facilitating some of those non-conference slates? Or does it most of that fall upon the shoulders of the individual member institutions, those teams?
I say this: we're as involved as our members want us to be. I
Okay.
think that's the best way to say that. And
Yeah.
in this case, where we had across the board, lots of teams with possible openings, and we had the Gulf South talking to us about an opportunity to kind of do a conference-wide arrangement. In that case, it was a conference ADs voted on it, and we moved forward. On the flip side, if our institutions are in a position where they can go out and find the games on their own, then that's what we'll do first. Like that would be priority 1 if that's reasonable. But if it's helpful for us to come alongside and help our institutions fill that schedule, then that's what we're going to do. So
Yep.
it's really we're as involved as they want us to be.
I like that. I
And
think
need
that's
us to be.
the good answer. I think a lot of people like to hear that, especially at the school level, right? There's not necessarily a mandate of X, Y, and Z, a little bit of latitude there. But you mentioned Ferrum College earlier, and I wanted to talk about that, transitioning up Division III to Division II, and getting into your conference right now as a provisional member. That certainly seems to have a big impact. One, just the addition, like you said, the 7th team is huge in a conference that is excuse me, certainly growing right now. But I thought another key point of that is it expands your footprint into Virginia. Talk about that and the importance of, continuing to expand this conference and their geographic footprint.
Yeah, Ferrum, when we started this is about a little over a year ago at this point, when we started really diving into that, what we saw was an institution that looked and felt a lot like our institutions.
Okay.
But they were competing at the Division III level without an athletic scholarship to offer potential recruits, and competing against institutions in the conference they're in Division III that just look and feel a lot different than they do. And so they were very interested in being in a more like-minded conference of institutions that just looked and felt more like them, and that's what we were able to give to them. And then for us, they were able to expand our reach into Virginia. They're able to give us a 7th football institution. They have some flexibility for us in other sports in terms of we have a 3-division alignment that we have in place for multiple sports, and so they're in a position where they could probably land in one of either 2 divisions. So they were a great fit. They're a great mission fit for us. They've got a rich history in football at the Division III level,
Yep.
and so we're excited about them coming on board and being a part of it as well.
And adding that 7th team is huge. So I can tell you from experience up here in the GLIAC, we tried that like 2 times a year conference slate type thing, and that sucked. That was the worst. Like, you go through the season. I remember we had Davenport twice in the year, and, God forbid we got like Grand Valley or Ferris twice a year. We had to go down there and then have them come up here and do that twice. But you get like a Davenport, I know we had at some point, or a Wayne State, I know we did that with, where you're playing 2 games against a conference foe, but only one of those 2 is counting for your conference record, and then that's going to skew the eventual. We don't have a quote-unquote conference championship game in the GLIAC, but, for you guys, that obviously would have been a potential issue if you were trying to go that route, because I can only imagine the frustration of a coach that wins a non-conference game against the
Right.
conference. Oh my goodness. I'd
Yeah, we
imagine that'd
actually in
be
that model, we actually they were both going to count as conference games,
okay.
but we're still. I mean, it was not the ideal plan, and so we're glad with 7 that we're not in a position where we have to do that. And as we
Good.
look to grow to hopefully 8 or possibly 9 institutions, we're going to have that single round robin with the championship game at the end, and we think that's going to be a real good fit for us.
Good. No, I like the sound of that a lot. And to continue on the topic of Ferrum, so when you talk about, you looked at them and you identify some of those pieces that helps, align them with some of the institutions in the conference already. Is that from you guys, from a conference perspective, do you make that initial reach out and start that conversation? What does that look like at the very infancy of those talks?
There's usually some level of information provided kind of behind the scenes. In this particular case, we had a mutual friend isn't the right word, but
Yeah,
a
I
mutual
got you.
partner in a consulting firm that they had hired to analyze the potential move to Division II.
Okay.
Well, that firm had worked with us to design our strategic plan. So we had the mutual partner there, and it was really through that individual that I first learned of Ferrum's potential interest in Division II. Then, of course, our board talked about it, and then at that point, we had to ultimately get connected with their president, and things moved pretty fast once that happened.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a case of like chicken or the egg. Like, is this fair and make the decision of, oh, we really want to explore this D2, and then you guys come along, or is this a prod of like hey, we could use another, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
come on up here, guys.
it's a little of both.
Yeah.
They had started the process of exploring Division II really before we even knew about it. But whether it was Conference Carolinas or what it was going to look like,
Yeah.
that's when we kind of came alongside with.
Absolutely. Now, they're not full members until 2027, it sounded like, right? Doing my reading?
Yeah, so we're excited that they were accepted into the 2-year process to
Yep.
become a member of Division II, which is a brand new process. There were some institutions that were originally in the 3-year. They got moved to the 2 once they made that announcement. But Ferrum is the first institution to apply for the 2-year expedited membership process, be
Okay.
accepted in that. So they'll have 2 years where they're not a full NCAA member, and then technically also they're a provisional member of the conference. However, Conference Carolina's policy is we permit provisional institutions to compete for and win championships and in all sports, whether there's an
Okay.
AQ involved or not.
Yeah.
So Ferrum absolutely has the opportunity to be crowned Conference Carolina's champion in any sport they compete in. We just have to have our ducks in a row and have our bylaws set correctly that if they were to win a sport in which usually the champion becomes the AQ,
Yep.
we have a way that we designate a different institution as our AQ.
I got you.
So in theory, if they were to make the championship game, the game itself would lose a little bit of. No, I don't think it would lose its luster because it'd still be a conference championship game. But we'd already know who the AQ is if that happened. The
Of
AQ would be
course.
the other team in that game because they can't win the AQ for these first 2 years.
Yeah, being a provisional member. That's neat, though, in that, for them, imagine going into a potential conference championship game if they make it that far and then saying, well, we can't, or I guess, earning the opportunity to play in a conference championship game, then to turn around and say, well, we can't do it anyways, so I guess we just don't show up. So the fact that they're able to do that and compete
Right.
for it, even though, like you said,
Well,
that comes
it
and go.
becomes
Yeah.
it becomes the Super Bowl in that point. That's the furthest they can go, and so that's an ultimate goal there. And then the other institution, win or lose, would have our AQ. So that would be the dynamic if that happened. And that's true for football as well as any other sport that has an automatic bid associated with it.
That's neat. Yeah, that's really cool that you feel like you found maybe a little bit of a middle ground there to appease maybe both
Right.
of the sides there. And obviously the rules, that comes first when you're in a position such as yourself. But I wanted to talk about, on the topic of playoffs, Super Region 2, when it comes to these remodeled Super Regions, right now you're sitting in with the Gulf South, South Atlantic, a lot of powerhouse programs in those first two names. Southern Intercollegiate, we talked about them earlier on in that agreement. They've got a couple squads that have been doing, pretty well the last couple years as well. When you look at this super region, there's a lot of tradition, a lot of history in some of those other conferences for you guys. A couple of your members, Susan, you mentioned Ferrum earlier on with some of that history. In the grand scheme of things, this is a young, outward-facing conference. And so for you guys, I feel that you have the chance in these next, say, 5-10 years to really cement what that logo means in the national football scene. Because, yes, it's had football before, but in any kind of recent history, nobody has associated your logo with Division II football. So how exciting, I guess, to phrase it better for you, how exciting is it, the proposition of you being the first to bring this back to the college football scene and creating your own semi-set of appearance and vision and what it looks like to be Conference Carolina football?
Yeah, I mean, we're thrilled and we're excited about the opportunity. We're very excited about the opportunity that football student athletes will have, that every other student athlete has in team sport competition, and that's an automatic bid from your conference. So, you know, our institutions, we know we're guaranteed at least one team to get into that championship with the AQ, and we appreciate that experience for those student athletes. Yeah, we're looking forward to building the brand. I mean, we've done a lot over the last 6 years since I've been commissioner at building the brand of Conference Carolinas across the board within Division II. But now we get to add football to that mix, and we get to, you know, open up that exposure to those that maybe just follow Division II football. But the thing I'll note, Conference Carolina sponsors next year. We will sponsor 30 sports.
There you go.
That is the most in Division II.
Wow.
In fact, only the Ivy League sponsors more sports across the NCAA than we do. We're adding women's flag football. We're the first conference at the Division II level to announce plans to sponsor women's flag football. But yeah, 30 sports is the amount of sports that our institutions will have opportunities to compete in this coming year. So it's not just about football, but I mean, adding football to that is huge, and we're so excited about it, and we're excited about building the brand in the football world and that we've already built across other sports.
30 sports, man. Holy. That's a lot. I did not know that, by the way. I knew you guys, you know, familiar, obviously, like I've seen like maybe some baseball or basketballs or some of those other deals that you find commonplace at a lot of other institutions, but 30 sports. That's impressive. That seriously is impressive across those members. And the last one that I kind of wanted to leave you off with here, and of course we're going back to football because that's what we're talking about today. But I did like your perspective on the overarching deal there. Your member schools in recent history have struggled when it comes to playoffs. And a lot of that comes with growing pains of being young programs. You had talked about the recency and the infancy of this conference and of the member institutions when it comes to their actual football, competitive teams playing, you know, a full slate of games. What about this setup do you believe can take them to the next step in terms of competing inside of a conference where they are full members? The AQ is obviously a huge part of that, but what about this setup do you think sets them up for some more competitive showcases on the national stage?
Yeah, I mean, we've got institutions, you're right. I mean, a lot of institutions have only had football programs for less than 5 years.
Absolutely.
Others have had it for less than 12, 15 years. But, you know, I see this as an opportunity. These are institutions that are now going to be able to compete week in and week out against peer institutions. And those that end up becoming more successful and end up, you know, somebody has a 9-2 season, somebody has an 8-3 season, that is going to help recruiting in the future. And so I think that when you put yourself in a conference with similarly resourced, similar like-minded institutions, those that are able to be successful in that are going to be able to use that success to become more successful at the regional and national level.
Yeah.
I think that's really the goal, much more so than if one of these institutions is competing in a different conference where the schools are 5 to 10 times the size of it, and that's what you've got to do week in and week out. It's not going to change. The competition come November and December in the tournament is going to be as fierce for whoever wins the AQ from our conference as they may have faced in other conferences. But week in and week out, they're going to compete against fellow like-minded, like-resourced institutions, and I think success will breed success.
I like that. I like that last bit there a lot. And also, I think it's worth noting, too, that, you know, you might get away from the Lenore Rhines, the Valdosta States, if you're some of these member schools switching over, the Delta States, West Alabama's, those kind of big powerhouse type programs. But you're not necessarily ducking in a sense because we just talked about the scheduling agreement. We just talked about the ways that you're able to facilitate some of this great competition. So it feels like from an outside perspective, again, that you found this middle ground of competing against like-minded, like funded, similarly based institutions without sacrificing the competitive nature that these schools have experienced as associate members of those other conferences, excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Agreed.
Awesome. Sweet. I'll take that. I'll take that as my final deal. Chris, you're the man. I really appreciate spending some time with me. That's all I got for you, man.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one. I'll see you. All right, big thank you to Chris for coming on the show. We're going to stay in the realm of D2 football and talk about the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic game coming this fall to the D2 realm. And you see the two teams right here, Virginia Union University and Miles College, facing off in the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic, August of 2025. That'll be in Canton, Ohio at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. So, what stands out right away about this matchup is these are two really good football teams. And, HBCU football at the Division II level has not been synonymous with a lot of success in recent history. These two teams proved a lot of those people who would think that wrong last year, and I'm really excited to talk about their success and what this matchup could mean in a Week 0 type contest. Now, on the website, it said that this is the first time in the 6-year history of the Labor Day weekend game, the newly dubbed Clash at the Classic will feature the defending football champions from the CIAA and the SIAC, which are the two conferences primarily composed of the historically black colleges and universities, what we know as HBCUs. Now, going into this, I wanted to talk about both these teams and where they both sit after last year's and what makes this a very interesting matchup for the Panthers and the Golden Bears, respectively. And what I will say before this, too, is that there's a lot of other events that revolve around this matchup. The football game, obviously, being kind of the showpiece front and center. But another one that's really exciting is a Battle of the Bands type of moment that they're going to have. Both of these bands have a lot of history and tradition there, so that'll always be a neat deal, especially when it comes to these HBCU conferences. There's a lot of pride in those marching bands, and they're really damn good. Usually is like the easiest, most simple way of saying it. But let's talk about these football teams. Virginia Union first. In 2024, they went 10-4. And that in itself is an incredibly impressive feat. Playing 14 games in college football means you're doing something right, because that means there's postseason play involved. Now, those losses, early on, it came to D1 Hampton, and then it was Johnson C. Smith and Virginia State that got them in the regular season. That Virginia State one is interesting because they lose to Virginia State, I believe the Trojans, that week. A week later, they play them in the CIAA championship. They get their revenge. They get the get back. Just a week later, they take the CIAA championship, and that would move them into the playoffs. Eventually, they would lose in the Elite Eight to who would be the runner-up in Valdosta State. The Blazers knocked them out. But they were one of the last 8 teams standing in D2 football. That is incredibly impressive. They reached the national quarterfinals for the first time in program history. And we'll talk about a lot of firsts for these programs, but that one seems like a very notable one, and you can't talk about that without talking about this quote from the man at the helm there. And this is Virginia Union head coach Alvin Parker after the second-round win over Lenore Ryan. He said this, quote, "Back in August, I said this was a team that could compete for the national championship, and I think some people laughed at that." And I loved this quote. I thought that was awesome. And this is a guy who keeps receipts, but this is a guy who has been confident in his program, his team, his playmakers for the long run, and obviously knew going into the 2024 season what they had on their hands, especially offensively. This offense was about as high-powered as it gets, especially in the CIAA. You look at that conference. They led the conference in scoring offense. The second closest team was 10 points per game behind the Panthers. That should tell you all you need to know about this offense. They were also top 3 categorically in scoring defense in conference play. But now, the big part about both these teams we'll talk about, what do they lose going into 2025? What kind of key playmakers or pieces, coaches are not joining them as they continue on this campaign? And I don't think you can start the conversation about Virginia Union without talking about Jada Byers. Like, that is just one of the most impactful performers that this program has seen in the history of this program, and I'll talk about why. So Jada Byers, those of you who don't know, phenomenal running back for the Panthers. He's a record holder for most career rushing yards at 5,311 and career touchdowns with 70 for the Panthers, along with numerous single game and season records. The big question for them is, how do you replace that production? Because you can't replace Jada Byers. That is borderline impossible. What you can try and do, sounds like a Moneyball thing here, like make them up in the aggregate, right? You can try and replace that production. Good luck. There's not a lot of backs that run for over 5,000 in their career at the college level, let alone when you're talking about a really good college program that's played against some top-level competition. So Jada Byers is the big hole, the big void that this offense will certainly miss coming into this season. And he recently, I mean, he's racked up a ton of awards this offseason. Got a little bit of video here from the HBCU Combine that I wanted to take a look at here where he was featured. He played also in the HBCU. I believe they had like an all-star bowl type of event, and he is currently on his journey to go and try and play professionally, whether that is in the NFL or some other league. We will definitely find out. I'll tell you right now, he's got the talent to play professionally. I don't know if that's in the NFL right away or somewhere else. He has the talent and the ball skills and all the attributes you want. You watch him play, you can see it. It's very, very apparent upon watching him play football. But as you notice there, this was held at the Saints practice facility a little over a week ago. He ran 4.84 at the Combine, which, if you follow running backs, that's not great, a 4.84. I did notice, though, that a lot of the other running backs had very similar times, so it could have been just something with some of the timing there, but that's got to be laser, and that's at an NFL facility. I have to imagine they're doing that correctly. I made a note here, though, that the game speed on him seems much faster than a 4.84, right? You have guys that maybe test incredibly well and put the pads on. Maybe it doesn't translate. Certainly not the case here with Jada Byers. He's a guy that certainly the game speed feels faster than a 4.84. I was kind of surprised to see that. So not a great note for him heading into his draft prep, but certainly not the end of the road. And Jada Byers is not the only big piece this offense is losing heading into 2025. And I was trying to look at their quarterback, and Mark Wright, who has had some really great production for this Virginia Union offense. Looking at the roster, says senior. You check out the socials, seems like he's got a final year that he will be coming back to play. So all signs point, at least from what I can tell on the internet kind of presence here, all signs point to Mark Wright being under center again for the Panthers in 2025. It is sometimes really difficult to track down that kind of information when there's not a central database, so to speak, for the D2 players. But let's assume that Mark Wright is back for that offense. That's a huge plus for this Virginia Union attack. But on the outside, his favorite target is one that they're losing. That's their leading wide receiver, Reginald Vick Jr. He transferred up to Wake Forest. I believe that's a move back home for him. Also, obviously, up a few levels there. In 2024, he finished the year with 12 touchdowns and over 1,100 yards. Both of those were good enough for top 5 across the country in all of Division II football. So, you lose Jada Byers. You lose Reginald Vick Jr., Those are two of your big powerhouse production pieces on offense. From what I can tell, the quarterback Mark Wright will be back. When you have a guy in a single collar like that who's experienced, who has won at a very high level, I don't think there's anything more valuable in college athletics than a leader who has done it all, so to speak. And maybe not done it all, because of course they want to finish the national championship, but has experienced a lot of success at this level. So, continuing down the list here, one of their best defenders, Jalen Mayo, he hit the portal recently, 3 interceptions, 52 tackles just a year ago. That's going to be a big hit. It seems that there are 10 more players in the portal as well, some solid playmakers, 6 defensive backs. From what I found in the portal from this Virginia Union defense, 6 DBs gone. So that's odd to me, right? Usually if a top DB or 2 leave, you have a bunch of guys that are excited because you're going to step in and hopefully earn a job, earn a spot. I don't know what exactly the incoming class looks like transfer portal-wise for them. This is just the information I could find. 3 of those being all-conference players out of those 10 additional pieces. So you're talking about losing some big pieces from Virginia Union. Now, the point is, everyone loses people. In this day and age, every single team's going to lose. This number of having like 10 to 14 players in the portal, it's kind of crazy, but that's normal. In college football, that is incredibly normal to have 14 guys jump ship after the year. Now, the crazier part is that there's a really, really, really good chance that all 14 of them, won't be playing college football a year after. There's a really good chance there's going to be a few of those guys that have played their last snap of college football. And if you want to enter the transfer portal, you have to accept the fact that you might be done. But anyways, that's the gist on Virginia Union. Really strong program, a lot of program firsts this year, a lot of statistical leaders, especially when it came to the offensive side of the ball. Let's go over and talk about Miles. Miles College, the Golden Bears, 10-3 in 2024. Their losses were to West Alabama. We know that's a damn good football program. D1 Alabama State, and then guess who? Valdosta State in the playoffs. This team is very fascinating because last year they started 0-2. You lose to that pair of Alabama teams, West Alabama, Alabama State. They won 10 straight after that, and some really, really great wins along the way. One of those wins being their first program history win in the playoffs over Carson Newman. And I got a video here. I know we reacted to it a little bit ago on the podcast, kind of when it actually happened. But here is a clip from the final seconds of the first playoff win in Miles College football history. It was obviously a pretty cool scene there. You can see the excitement from these guys. So you want to talk about program first. This is a program that has experienced an unimaginable level of success and an unprecedented level of success for this Golden Bear squad, and they've done it at a very high level. The challenge for them is going to be, can you do it again? The challenge for both these teams is, but let's talk more about these guys. They led the SIAC in scoring defense. They allowed only 18 points per game, and I think that was what's most impressive about this Carson Newman performance. They go against an offense that they maybe were quite unfamiliar with. Carson Newman running that flex bone offense. Ashley Ingram comes from Navy, the new head coach over there for the Eagles, instills that offense. They shut it down. They absolutely shut down the Eagles in this one. They did that to opponents all year long. So for this Miles team, you see it there, just a 1-point victory. But man, that is a momentous win in the history of this football program. And their defense, very much unlike Virginia Union, their defense was the stopping point, quite literally and physically, all year long for this squad. Now, for them, one of the big cliff notes is they got a brand new head coach, Chris Good, hopefully pronouncing that one correctly. Their previous coach, Sam Shade, took the head job at D1 Alabama A&M. So he's out of town, got an upgrade. They bring in Chris Good, coach, and this is his first time being a college head coach, which was an interesting point for me. He was a defensive coordinator for the Birmingham Steel Dogs in the Arena League. He played at Alabama, was drafted to the Colts in 1987. He played all 7 years of his NFL career in Indianapolis for the Colts. So I would certainly say it's an interesting hire, right? Doesn't have any head coaching experience at the college level. Has a coordinator experience in what is technically a professional league, in the Arena League, has played at a very high level at Alabama, and played in the NFL for 7 seasons. That's something that very few individuals can say and put together on a resume. So an interesting hire doesn't mean it's a bad hire. I'm sure he's got a lot of great football knowledge. He's been around the game forever, and I'm excited to see what he does with this program. From what I can tell about this Miles team, 12 players in the portal right now, including 7 starters. That hurts, right? You only got 22 starters. You got to imagine you're losing a chunk of those to graduation, guys who are seniors, redshirt seniors, getting out of their COVID year, that kind of deal. You bring back your top 2 tacklers on defense, which is certainly important. The offensive side of the ball has filled a lot of question marks for me in terms of who's coming back, what does it look like, how are they supplementing that with transfer portal players on the other side of things? Because again, we talked about both these teams losing transfer portal players. Obviously, they're going to supplement that with transfer portal players incoming into their programs. Again, stuff that is pretty hard to track at this point of the year. A lot of that will probably shake out as we get going into the offseason. But general thoughts, again, going back to this matchup, right? And I mentioned it earlier, 2 really strong programs that in 2024 experienced a lot of program firsts. Now, the thing that's interesting about this matchup, and I think the big sticking point about this game, who can make it a program second? Who can build off last year's momentum, and how do they carry that over into week 0? Because I think a big piece of this, we talked a lot about it, there's lots of new pieces, lots of playmakers. Talk about that Virginia Union offense, a lot of question marks for this Miles team, especially when it comes to even the coaching staff, what that looks like. What kind of chemistry will these teams have come week 0? We're talking about a game that could have some real playoff implications at the D2 football level, but these 2 teams could both be very different teams respectively when it comes to playoff football time, when it comes to a SIAC or a CIAA championship. The growth that you typically see, especially from week 0 when you extend the introduction of the season all the way to week 11, week 12 of the year, you see a lot of growth. I think a great example this last season, Ferris State goes down to Pittsburgh State. They lose in the jungle and Kearney Smith. That's the only game that they drop, right? They go on and run the table and win the national championship. And, I think it's very safe to say if Pittsburgh State and Ferris had met in the playoffs, I think Ferris takes it in a landslide. But that's just to show the strides that the Bulldogs made throughout the course of the season. It was still an incredible game in week 0. I think this could have a similar implications. Not to say one of these teams is going to lose and then run the table and win the national championship. That might be a little bit far-fetched. I do think both these teams are serious playoff contenders coming into 2025, but I want to almost curtail expectations because this is a week 0 matchup, and these teams can change so much between week 1 and week 11 when you're talking about conference championship, automatic qualifier implications, right? Because now you win the conference, you get into the dance. That's the new rule in D2 football. So excited about that matchup. Really curious and interested to see how those teams roll out in 2025. Let's talk about a D3 product that has signed with an NFL team. That was my pitiful attempt at a drum roll, but there it is. Anthony Kendall, the alum out of Baldwin Wallace. He's signed to the Cleveland Browns. Played defensive back for the Yellow Jackets. He was a second-team All-American. Now, originally, you see the photo there. He was originally signed by the Titans as an undrafted free agent in 2023. And we had kind of highlighted him then. You're kind of a couple pictures of him here. We had kind of highlighted him then when he was originally signed. But the last year or so, he's bounced around a little bit. This is his graphic, from the old IG. He's played in 16 career games, spent parts of last season on the Titans and the Ravens practice squads. So it's not like he's been away from the game, so to speak. He's very much still been involved, but was signed to Cleveland. That is very much assuming the active roster. How about these uniforms, by the way? Absolutely incredible. The old, Oilers homage. I think those are so sick. So shout out them. But also shout out Anthony, because that is an awesome achievement for him. And like I said, second-team All-American for the Yellow Jackets at Baldwin Wallace. His senior year, 3 interceptions, 12 pass breakups, 56 tackles, along with a forced fumble and a sack. He was an all-region player, and he certainly made his alma mater proud. So a big-time move for him. We'll see if he can remain on that active roster and play some meaningful snaps for the Browns. He was a guy that got in there and made some plays on special teams for the Titans. Did see a few defensive snaps, so it won't be his first time playing in quote-unquote meaningful snaps in the National Football League. Really excited to see what the next steps are for him, and would love to get him on the show. So that's just the big news out of D3 football tonight. But otherwise, that's about it for this episode of D1 Rejects. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. Let us know who we need to get on the show, what kind of news we need to cover, and thank you so much for tuning in. I've been Kobe Manzo.